Have you ever imagined that a single message could bring the country to a standstill? What if that message was so powerful that it caused a judge to block government hiring? What could have been said to cause such a turnaround? And most importantly, what does it have to do with you? Sometimes the truth comes as a whisper. Other times it comes as a bang that cannot be ignored. And today, what has been revealed goes far beyond the headlines. It's a direct call to your heart. Are you ready to question what you've always believed? Are you ready to look beyond the obvious? Because in the end, what can really change your life is not what happens out there, but what you choose to do with what you hear here and now. Stay with me to the end and discover not only what shocked a country, but also what can revolutionize your own journey. The moment is now. And the choice is yours. Have you ever noticed how truth often comes when you least expect it, like a breeze that turns into a storm, or a whisper that suddenly echoes too loudly to be ignored? That's how it happened. The whole country was taken by surprise. A judge, in an act that many called courageous and others controversial, blocked all government hiring. But what motivated this decision wasn't just the law, it was something bigger, something that touched not only reason, but also conscience. Tercio. News spread quickly. Headlines proclaimed the unprecedented decision. Judge blocks new hires after surprising message. Many wondered, how could a simple message have such an impact? And the answer lay not only in the words spoken, but in what they inspired. For sometimes a truth that has been hidden for a long time finds a crack to come out into the light. And when it does, it's impossible to go back. The content of the message revealed during a tense press conference wasn't just an appeal, it was a mirror. It exposed flaws that went beyond corruption or mismanagement. It touched on something deeper: the loss of values, the exchange of integrity for self-interest, and the forgetting of the true purpose of serving others. These words spoke not only to the government, but to every citizen who had somehow become accustomed to turning a blind eye to what they knew was wrong. How often in life do we become complacent? How often do we justify small deviations by saying, everyone does it, or it's just this one time? The message asked this question directly, without beating around the bush. And that's what moved people, because acknowledging a mistake is painful, but ignoring it is even more destructive. When the judge heard this, he didn't just see an accusation, he saw a call to conscience. And moved by that realization, he decided to act. It was an act that divided opinion. Many applauded, others criticized. There were those who said it was an exaggeration, that politics had always been like this, and that nothing would change. But there were also those who silently felt the impact, not only of the decision, but of what it represented. Because deep down, everyone knows when something is out of place, and no matter how hard we try to avoid it, there comes a time when life forces us to look at what we have been trying to hide. This unexpected decision caused a standstill that affected several industries. Construction stopped, projects were put on hold, and many families waiting for those jobs were left waiting. It was easy to blame the judge, but wasn't there something else going on? Maybe it wasn't just the hiring freeze, but what was behind? What made someone with so much to lose go against an entire system? The answer was in the message. It wasn't just about laws or rules. It was about principles, about what each of us accepts as normal, and how much we are willing to tolerate in the name of comfort. The judge's courage was in showing that sometimes you have to stop the flow to avoid reaching an abyss. And in doing so, he raised a larger question. Are we building something solid, or are we just stacking cards that will collapse at the slightest breeze? This episode revealed something beyond politics. It showed that when consciousness awakens, action becomes inevitable. And that even in the midst of chaos, truth has undeniable power. For truth, when it comes, can be uncomfortable, but it is also liberating. And there, in that moment of tension and uncertainty, the whole country was invited to look at itself. And it's strange how decisions like this, which seem so far away, can reflect issues that we carry inside. After all, how many times have you found yourself in situations where you knew what was right, but hesitated for fear of the consequences? How many times have you chosen silence to avoid conflict when you knew there was a price to pay? What this episode has shown is that at some point we all face such choices. And it's at that point that the story, which seemed to be just about a judge and a court decision, begins to reveal something much larger. For the question that remains is not just, why did he do it? But what prevents us from doing the same in the face of the injustices we witness every day? What moves us or paralyzes us when conscience calls? Without our realizing it, what seemed far away begins to draw closer, touching realities that are familiar to us. When something so shocking happens, the first question that arises is, why? Would a judge, aware of all the ramifications of his decision, choose to suspend the hiring of an entire government? Was it just an act of courage, or was there something deeper driving him? To understand, you have to look beyond the headlines and listen to what touched his heart enough to make him go against the grain. The content of the message that reached him was unusual. It wasn't a political document or a technical report. They were words that carried a different weight, not in tone but in the truth they brought. They spoke of justice, but not the kind written down in codes or laws. They spoke of that which comes from conscience and commitment to what is right, even if it costs the comfort or acceptance of others. These words, coming from someone who had chosen to expose a hidden reality, provoked more than reflection. They provoked action. When the judge heard them, he didn't just see an appeal, he saw a mirror. For when faced with the truth, there is no way to remain inert. Have you ever had a moment when you heard something and felt that you could no longer ignore it? That you had to take a stand, even though you knew the consequences? That's exactly what happened. The message wasn't accusing you, it was calling you. It was as if to say, you have the power to change this story. What are you going to do with it? And it was in that internal confrontation that the decision was born. It wasn't made in the heat of the moment, but in the silence of a conscience that no longer wanted to be part of what it saw being repeated. He knew the repercussions. He knew the criticism that would come. He knew that he would be misunderstood by many. But when faced with the truth, fear loses its power. There are times when it is more painful to remain silent than to face the consequences of speaking out. By making his decision public, he revealed a side that few knew, a man who, despite his robes and institutional responsibilities, carried within him the restlessness of someone who could no longer pretend that all was well. How many of us have been there? How many times at work, in the family, or in some everyday situation, have we noticed injustices and preferred to remain silent, thinking that it's none of my business? But what if it is? What if the change we hope to see in the world depends on what we choose to do or not do? The message he received wasn't just about corruption. It spoke of values lost over time, of promises made but not kept, of people treated like numbers in a system that has gradually forgotten that behind every signed piece of paper, lives are at stake. It spoke of the indifference that grows when greed replaces empathy. And that's what hurt the most. The realization that many had become so accustomed to what was wrong that they no longer cared. In explaining the reasons for his decision, the judge said a phrase that stayed with those who heard it. When the conscience awakens, the body can no longer sleep in peace with injustice. That simple phrase resonated because on some level we all understand what it's like to carry that discomfort. It's that feeling that squeezes your chest when you see someone being wronged and you know you could have done something about it. It's that inner voice that keeps asking, what if it had been you? Oddly enough, the message that started it all didn't call for severe punishment or revenge. It was an invitation. A call for those in positions of power to remember why they were there. To serve, not to serve themselves. To build, not to destroy. To protect, not to exploit. And as simple as they may seem, words like that have a power that official documents often lack. They touch the soul, and when that happens, change becomes inevitable. The hiring freeze, while controversial, opened up conversations that had long been avoided. People began to question their own responsibilities, not just in government or the courts, but in everyday life. After all, what's the point of pointing out the mistakes of others if, at the first opportunity, we deviate from what we know is right? The judge only took the first step, but what about us? There's something special about moments like this. They remind us that real change doesn't just happen in offices or courtrooms. It begins with small choices: what we accept, what we ignore, what we support or silence. And in that sense, this man's attitude was a mirror for society as a whole. Not about laws, but about conscience. And it's interesting to note how, by taking a sincere stand, we inspire others to do the same. People who had felt powerless began to ask themselves, if he had the courage, why can't I? And that's how an isolated decision becomes a movement. Because when a spark ignites, it's hard to contain the fire that spreads. It's strange to observe how in the world laws are made to maintain order, while on another, deeper level, there is a justice that goes beyond codes and courts. Human justice seeks to judge visible actions and behaviors, while divine justice probes the heart and reveals hidden intentions. So when these two worlds intersect, questions arise that aren't always easy to answer. Is what is right in the eyes of the law right in the eyes of conscience? And if there is a conflict between these two paths, which one should one follow? The judge followed the rules that govern the system in deciding to block the recruitment. But in his words, it was clear that his decision was not based solely on what was on the paperwork. It went beyond that. It was as if an inner voice said, if you know what's right, why hesitate? How many times have you found yourself in situations where the rules seemed to point one way, but your heart insisted on another? It is in this space of tension that the true face of justice is revealed, not the one that seeks the guilty, but the one that seeks restoration. In divine justice, there are no evasions. It cannot be manipulated or delayed. It is immediate because it happens in each of us. It's the restlessness we feel after an act of selfishness, or the peace we experience after choosing the good, even if in secret. When the judge heard the message that started it all, he didn't just see facts. He felt the urgency of a truth that demands transformation, not just punishment. And this difference is crucial. While human laws can be circumvented, the justice of the heart always finds a way to make itself present. When I was among you, I saw many who sought justice only for others, forgetting to apply it to their own lives. They would criticize their neighbor, point the finger at the ruler. But when it came to small daily decisions, they closed their eyes to the truth. This still happens. It's easy to demand integrity from leaders, but what about us? Do we pay the price for honesty when no one is looking? Do we choose the truth, even if it hurts us in the moment? The blockade episode revealed this very duality. On the one hand, there were those who defended the legality of the treaties. On the other, there were those who called for morality and ethics. But must these two sides be opposed? True justice, the kind that transforms and heals, comes from the union of what is right and what is compassionate. It's not about condemning, but about correcting with love. And that's what the message was trying to provoke. Not just a reaction, but a transformation of consciousness. In the midst of the debates, many asked, is it worth sacrificing contracts and jobs in the name of principles? It's a legitimate question, especially when lives are at stake, but there is an even bigger question. What kind of society are we building if we allow the rush for results to override integrity? Because in the end, the rush to solve problems cannot justify solutions born of dishonesty. What is built on quicksand will collapse sooner or later. Human justice, limited as it is, tries to balance what it can, but divine justice, it knows every detail. It doesn't need material proof, it sees what the eyes cannot reach. That's why when someone acts on that inner truth as the judge did, it inspires others to look within. After all, who hasn't tried to justify a mistake by saying, but everyone does it, or I had to protect myself? But conscience doesn't accept excuses. It simply shows what it is. It's up to each individual to choose whether to listen to it or ignore it. There's something liberating about following the right path, even when it's difficult. Because even if it creates temporary obstacles, it creates a peace that no amount of money can buy. How many times have you regretted doing what you knew was wrong, even if it brought you benefits? And how many times, when you have acted righteously, have you felt a lightness that words cannot explain? This is the invitation of divine justice, to live so that when you lay your head on the pillow, your heart is at rest. The blocking episode was more than a court decision. It was a reminder that at some point, we will all be called upon to choose between what is convenient and what is right. And when that moment comes, there is no law in the world that can silence the voice of conscience. The message that echoed in that courtroom is actually repeated every day in our lives. The question is, are we ready to listen? While many were arguing about the legal implications, something quieter and more powerful was happening. Ordinary people were beginning to question their own choices. After all, the great transformation doesn't happen in the courtroom, but in our hearts. And it is as this inner change spreads that the outer world begins to adjust, not because laws have been changed, but because consciences have been awakened. And so, from a simple decision, movements are born that no one can contain. There are truths that, when revealed, feel like a punch in the gut. And that's exactly what happened when the message that motivated the judge's decision came to light. It wasn't an ordinary criticism or condemnation. It was a direct warning, exposing the cracks in a system that has long been built on fragile foundations. It was like opening a door that had been locked for years and letting the light reveal all that many would rather keep hidden. The content of this message pointed to old vices and practices that, while reprehensible, have unfortunately become routine in various public sectors. Hiring without fair criteria, favors disguised as legal procedures, promises of employment in exchange for political favors. It was all there, exposed with a clarity that was disturbing. And not just because it spoke of wrongdoing, but because it showed how much society had become accustomed to it over the years. It's easy to criticize those at the top, to say that the problem lies with the rulers, the bosses, the others. But this message revealed something deeper. The system only remains corrupt because many, at different levels, choose to benefit from it. And that's the hardest part to hear, because it's always more comfortable to point fingers than to look at your own concessions. How often do we set aside our principles in the name of convenience? How many small corruptions do we tolerate on a daily basis because we think they are harmless? The message spoke directly to this. It said that corruption is not only born in high places, it germinates in everyone's small decisions, in the way to get ahead, in the favor accepted without question, in the lie told to avoid an inconvenience. And when added together, these individual attitudes create the fertile ground on which great injustices thrive. This was the inconvenient truth that many preferred not to hear, but it was there, irrefutable. The judge, upon hearing and reflecting on these words, realized that his decision couldn't be just a legal response. It had to be a symbolic gesture, a milestone that said, no more pretending that we don't see what's in front of us, because there are times when the status quo becomes unbearable. And although his decision sparked protests and resistance, it also awakened a sense of urgency in many who had passively watched values crumble away in silence. But why is such a warning so difficult to hear? Because it demands change, and change hurts. It hurts to give up privilege, to rethink behavior, to question what has always been considered normal. It's more comfortable to believe that the problem is far away, that they are wrong. But when the truth knocks on the door and reveals that the problem lives within us, discomfort is inevitable. And it was this discomfort that spread after the message was published. It also highlighted something essential, the disconnect between public office and the true purpose of service. How many, upon assuming positions of power, forget that they are there to care for people, not to profit from them? How many begin with good intentions, but when caught up in the system, give in to the temptations of easy gain? The warning was clear. Don't forget why you're here. Don't trade your essence for the crumbs of temporary power. These words, harsh as they were, also contained an invitation to return to integrity. It wasn't an attack to destroy, but a call to rebuild, so that each person who heard this message would ask themselves, what kind of world am I helping to create with my choices? Because in the end, the system is a reflection of ourselves. If we want honest leaders, we must be citizens of integrity. If we want justice, we must practice it in our relationships, in our work, in our daily lives. The hiring ban was only the visible tip of a much larger iceberg. The real impact of the message was to provoke this self-reflection. After all, what's the point of changing laws if we don't change hearts? The system can be reformed from the outside, but if the people who make it up remain stuck in the same patterns, everything will go back to the way it was before. And that was the most uncomfortable provocation of all. Are we really ready to change, or do we just want things to look better? What about you? Have you ever stopped to think about what you might be tolerating in your own life that is contributing, however subtly, to this reality? Sometimes the change we hope to see in the world begins with the small act that no one sees, but that you know has to be different. The wake-up call has been given. The question now is, who is willing to listen and, more importantly, to act? And it's strange how even after such a big shock, many people try to go back to their routine, pretending that nothing has happened. But conscience, once awakened, rarely allows a return to comfortable ignorance. Faced with a public scandal, many people's first reaction is to look the other way. It's easy to blame the system, the politicians, the institutions. After all, it is often more comfortable to look at other people's mistakes than to look in the mirror. But the message that triggered this turnaround carried a provocation that few were willing to face. What if the real problem isn't just on the outside? What if it lives inside each of us? This question, though uncomfortable, is essential, because every corrupt structure is fed at some level by the small concessions we make on a daily basis. Think about it. How many times have you witnessed something wrong and chosen to remain silent? How many situations have gone unnoticed in your eyes because it was easier to stay out of it? It's in these small omissions that we, without realizing it, feed the very system we criticize. The truth is that the change we so desperately want to see in the world begins with each individual. The judge who made the courageous decision to block the hiring process felt it himself. When he heard the revelatory message, he was seized by a restlessness that he could no longer ignore. This wasn't just about external corruption. It was about inner integrity, about how impossible it is to demand justice on the outside if we allow small injustices into our own lives. How many times have you rationalized a small mistake by saying, "It's just this once," or "It won't make a difference"? But it's those seemingly innocuous decisions that, taken together, build a culture of permissiveness. And before we know it, we're living in a reality where wrong has become the rule and right the exception. The message called attention to this. What have you accepted that you should have rejected? It's not about perfection, no one is flawless, but about honesty with one's conscience. By acting, the judge wasn't saying he was perfect. He simply recognized that continuing to turn a blind eye would make him an accomplice to something greater. And that's a lesson that transcends any political context. How many times in your life have you been faced with difficult choices where the easiest way was the least right way? And in those times, what prevailed? Comfort or truth? There's an old saying, if you can't beat 'em, join 'em. But is that the best solution? Aren't we just postponing the consequences by settling for what's wrong? For sooner or later, what we ignore will come back to haunt us. The judge understood that by not acting, he was betraying not only the law, but also his own conscience. What about you? In what areas of your life have you silenced that inner voice calling for change? Maybe it's not big decisions. Maybe it's small daily gestures. Respecting a line, giving back extra change, telling the truth even when it's uncomfortable. The world is made up of these small actions. And if we want to see fairer governments, we have to start by practicing fairness in our own environments. After all, how can we demand integrity from leaders when we often use lies as a resource in our relationships? How can we demand honesty when we take dishonest shortcuts in the smallest of situations? The message was clear. Before pointing the finger at others, ask yourself, what is it in me that needs to be changed? This self-reflection is powerful, not to create guilt, but to inspire responsibility. Because real change doesn't start with fiery speeches or finger-pointing. It begins with the quiet decision to be different, even when no one is looking. And when that inner change spreads to more people, the outer change is inevitable. The blocked hiring episode was a shock, yes, but the real impact wasn't just the judge's decision or the authorities' reaction. It was the subtle invitation to each citizen to reflect on his or her own share of responsibility. The system is a reflection of collective choices. If it's sick, it's because at some level we've all contributed to it, whether through wrongdoing or convenient inaction. And that's why change is possible. Because if everyone has contributed to getting to this point, everyone can contribute to a new beginning. It's not about expecting leaders to be perfect examples. It's about everyone taking responsibility for being a small ray of light in the midst of the darkness. And when many do that at the same time, the darkness can no longer prevail. So the question that remains is not just what the government or the judge did, it's what you are willing to do with that reflection. Because in the end, no matter how many laws are made or how many trials are held, if people's hearts remain closed to the truth, it will all be in vain. But if you choose integrity, even in silence, you are already contributing to a better world. And so, when you least expect it, this inner transformation begins to be reflected in outer attitudes that inspire others to do the same. The choices we make every day, however small they may seem, shape the path we follow. And it's often easy to believe that our choices are insignificant in the face of such a large and complex system. What can I do? I'm just one person. How often has this thought crossed your mind? But what if I told you that the greatest changes always begin with a single bold decision? What if, without even realizing it, you were in control of much more than you knew? When the judge chose to suspend the hiring, he wasn't just applying a law. He was choosing not to be complicit in something that violated his conscience. It might have been easier to ignore it, to go through the motions to avoid conflict. But in that moment he understood something important. The price of inaction is always higher than the discomfort of making the right choice. And it is this truth that we often avoid facing in our daily lives. How many times have you faced a difficult decision and chosen the easy way out? Whether it's staying silent in the face of injustice, not helping someone out of laziness, or accepting something you knew was wrong to avoid problems. Each of these choices builds, brick by brick, the reality around you. If we want a more just, honest and empathetic world, we must start by cultivating these values in our own attitudes. Some people believe that only big actions make a difference, but change starts with the little things. An employee who chooses not to participate in favoritism, a student who chooses not to cheat on an exam, a driver who obeys the rules of the road even when no one is looking. These are simple attitudes, but they carry immense power, because when done with truth, they inspire others to do the same. Through a message that motivated the judge's decision, emphasized just that. What you do when no one is watching reveals who you really are. It's easy to have integrity when people are watching, but real change is born in the silence of small sacrifices, in saying no to temptations that offer immediate gain, but wound the soul. What about you? What have you chosen when life brings you to this crossroads? You may think, but if I change on my own, what difference will it make? More than you think. Every chain starts with a link. Every collective change begins with an individual choice. Remember, this judge could have remained silent like so many others, but he chose to act. And that choice reverberated. People began to talk about ethics, integrity, and responsibility. What seemed like an isolated act became a catalyst for conversations and change that had been dormant. What if you could be that starting point? You don't have to wait for big opportunities to make a difference. The opportunity is in the now, in seemingly ordinary choices, listening carefully to someone in need, being honest in situations that offer an unfair advantage, choosing words that build rather than hurt. These actions, though simple, carry an energy capable of transforming environments, relationships, and even destinies. Think about how many times you've been touched by an unexpected gesture of kindness. Perhaps someone helped you through a difficult time, or you received a word of encouragement when you needed it most. This didn't happen by accident. Someone's choice allowed you to experience a little bit of light in the midst of the shadows. And so it is with your choices. They can be the light on someone's path. But it's not just about others. Your choices also shape who you become. Each time you choose the right path, no matter how difficult, you strengthen your essence. You build strong roots to support you on the hard days. And most of all, you experience the peace that comes from a clear conscience. No external reward can compare to the relief of knowing that you did the right thing, even if no one else knew or recognized it. The judge was not looking for applause when he made his decision. He knew he would be criticized. But he chose to carry the weight of truth rather than the deceptive ease of acquiescence. And that's a powerful example for all of us. Choosing the right thing will not always be easy. Sometimes you will be questioned, judged, or even ridiculed. But in the end, the peace that comes from an upright heart is worth infinitely more than any external approval. Now I ask you, what small choices can you make today that, taken together, will transform your life and the world around you? Maybe it's to apologize to someone you've hurt. Maybe it's telling the truth in a situation where it seems easier to lie. Or maybe it's choosing not to participate in conversations that spread hate or judgment. The world changes when you change, and it starts now. It's funny how when we become aware of the power of our own choices, we realize that transformation is not a distant possibility. It is quietly within reach. As news of the hiring freeze dominated the headlines, everyone's attention turned to the immediate impact. Who would be affected? How would the government respond? What would happen to current projects? And as usual, most of the conversation revolved around the practical and political implications. But few realized that behind this decision and the message that motivated it was a silent invitation, not just to the government or the judge, but to all of us. An invitation to rethink our path. It's natural to focus on what's out there. Society conditions us to analyze what others are doing, to judge external actions, and to react to circumstances. But what if the biggest change isn't in the decisions made in offices or in the headlines? What if the real call is for each of us to stop and ask ourselves, where am I going with the choices I make every day? Because in the end, the reality we live in is built by the choices we make, individually and collectively. The judge, acting on his conscience, didn't intend to be a hero or to be the center of attention. What he did was remind everyone of something we already know deep down. The truth can be ignored for a while, but never forever. And when it does emerge, we face an inevitable dilemma: continue as we are, or take the first step in a new direction. This choice, as difficult as it may seem, will always be in our hands. How often have you wished for things to change around you? For the world to be fairer, for people to be kinder, for institutions to act with more integrity? These wishes are legitimate, but it's easy to forget that the world is a reflection of the sum of our behaviors. If we want a different environment, we must be the difference. If we long for more honesty, let it begin with us. If we call for love and understanding, let our words and attitudes be the first expression. The message that provoked the court decision carried that call. It wasn't just about exposing mistakes. It was about offering a choice: to continue to perpetuate patterns we know are wrong, or to begin, however slowly, a real transformation. And this transformation doesn't require grand deeds or theatrical gestures. It begins with something simple but powerful: awareness. The awareness that your every action, be it a word spoken, a thought cultivated, or an attitude taken, contributes to the environment in which you live. When you hear all this, you may think, but does what I do with my life really make a difference? In the world? The answer is yes, because small actions multiplied by millions of people create movements that no force can stop. And even if no one sees or acknowledges it, the peace you'll feel from doing the right thing will be your greatest reward. Don't wait for others to change. Be the change you wish to see. And if this whole episode, which began with a simple document and ended with a historic court decision, is of any use, let it be as a reminder that the time to act is now. Not tomorrow, not when it's convenient, not when the circumstances are ideal, but now, while you are still breathing and able to choose your next step. Because in the end, that's what defines your story. Not what others do, but what you choose to do with what's in front of you. Maybe that sounds difficult, and sometimes it is. Making decisions that go against the grain, that challenge old patterns, and that require courage can bring resistance, criticism, and even isolation. But what is more valuable? The temporary approval of others or the knowledge that you are walking in peace with your conscience? The judge made his choice and faced the consequences. What about you? What will your choice be from now on? The invitation is there. Not an easy way, but a true way, a path where every step, no matter how small, is taken with purpose and integrity, where every word is spoken with love and responsibility, where every attitude reflects the person you want to be, regardless of what the world around you is doing. Because at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. Living in such a way that when you look back, you'll be proud of your journey. And remember, it's not about changing the world all at once. It's about changing your world, your thoughts, your actions, your relationships. And in doing so, without even realizing it, you will inspire others to do the same. For the light that shines within you can illuminate the path of someone lost in the darkness. Now, as the headlines fade and the news changes, there remains the question that echoes beyond any scandal. What are you going to do with this awareness that has awakened in you? The answer is not in me or in anyone else. It's in your heart, waiting for a gesture, a choice, an action. There comes a time when words end and only truth remains. Today, that truth has knocked on your door. The world may continue as it is. The news may change, people may forget, but you heard it. And once consciousness awakens, there's no going back. Now you have a choice. Stay where you've been or take the step that could change your life, and by extension, the world around you. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is acting in spite of it. Truth is not what is comfortable, but what remains even when no one is looking. The time for waiting is over. The time for being is now. Don't waste the opportunity that life is offering you right now, for in the end, it will not be your excuses that count. It will be your actions. Be the light that breaks the darkness. Be the hand that lifts, the voice that comforts, the heart that chooses to love. You have that strength. It has always been there, just waiting for you to recognize it. May the peace of the Father surround your heart. May your steps be guided by truth, and may you find in every decision the light that already dwells within you. Walk in peace and be the difference the world is waiting for.